Hey everybody, welcome back. In this week's video, I'm going to be talking about why your photos just don't look realistic. I spent years as a photographer trying to dial in my photos and get them to look realistic, and to this day, it's still something that I and thousands of other landscape photographers struggle with. But I've found that after working with thousands of students and emails and everything like that, I've found that there's really 5 reasons that your photos don't look realistic. And your photo may have one of these problems, it may have all of the problems, and I'm going to be walking you through each of them in today's video. So the first problem that you may be having is that your image has too much dynamic range. Now, dynamic range is a nice thing to have because then you can really accentuate the shadows and the highlights, but oftentimes by doing an HDR image where you're combining an image exposing for the shadows and one exposing for the highlights, you're just having way too much range than would be humanly possible and even possible to see with your eyes. And so this is something that I don't recommend. Rarely do I ever recommend doing an HDR image. It is okay. I know that lots of people will tell you never blow out the highlights, never lose all the detail in the shadows, but I'm going to tell you right now, it is okay to do one or both of those in an image that has a lot of dynamic range. It's going to help you produce a little bit more realistic looking photo. Second problem I see all the time is people overusing the clarity or the dehaze sliders. Now, these sliders are nice to have, but I usually don't recommend using them more than 10 points at a time because the effect can really just get out of hand. So for that reason, I recommend either staying away from the sliders or keeping them very, very low. The next reason that your photos may not look realistic is because your masking is not very good. So if you're just using a big old brush and you're trying to brighten up something in the foreground, but you are not doing a very good job of masking it and that mask is going over into the edges, you create a photo where it's very obvious that you've brightened a particular spot of the image, whereas we want our edits to be as seamless as possible. So we want to be using advanced masking tools in Photoshop or just avoid using like spot adjustments whatsoever. Next thing that I see is one of the biggest problems, and that is that your white balance is incorrect. Now, having an incorrect white balance is absolutely detrimental to your photo. In my opinion, if the white balance is off, there's no possible way that you can do anything to fix the photo other than fixing the white balance. And that is the first step that you need to take in all of your images. There's tons of guides out there with how to fix the white balance. I'm more than happy to make a guide at some point on how I fix the white balance, but this is something that you want to do. Make sure the white balance is correct because it is so important to make your images look realistic. And that's not to say that you can't tone your image to make it maybe a little cooler, a little warmer. Toned is okay, but totally wrong white balance just doesn't work. And you can kind of tell in some images that they're just maybe way too blue, way too magenta, way too green, whatever it is, they're just off. So do not fall in that category. Make sure that you spend a lot of time dialing in that white balance, even if it takes 15 or 20 minutes. Play with it before and after. Make sure that the white balance is correct. Another problem I see all the time, especially with new photographers, is that their image is too saturated. So I will add saturation in a lot of my images because raw files tend to kind of reduce saturation quite a bit, but you do not want to add too much. This is something that you'll acquire an eye for the more you get into landscape photography, but for the time being, I recommend never adding more than 10 or 15 points of saturation, and I also highly recommend trying the vibrance slider instead of saturation, as this can kind of help your image look a little more realistic. Vibrance targets the undersaturated parts of the photo, whereas saturation just increases the saturation of everything. The last problem I see all the time is too much or too little contrast. As a landscape photographer, we're mostly shooting in RAW, so you're going to notice that your images are very flat when they come out of the camera, and this is so that you have more details that you can adjust in post-processing. Now, to adjust the contrast, I highly recommend that you make sure you add enough contrast so that your whites are actually true white and not gray, and your blacks are true black and not gray. Because you'll notice that when you pull an image off of the camera, oftentimes what you think would be black is actually a little bit gray just because it's low contrast. So I usually adjust it just enough so that I get rid of all the grays and turn things black or white. But I don't want too much contrast. This is another one of those things that just takes time for you to acquire an eye to figure out exactly what you want, but continue to play with it and don't over contrast your scene. I do see that much more than under contrast. So when in doubt, err on the side of less contrast. Thank you guys so much for checking out this week's video. I really hope it was helpful in allowing you guys to kind of dial in your images, make sure that they are a little more realistic looking. If you've got a question or you're struggling with an image, drop in the comments. I'm happy to give you some help, let you know kind of what I think. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you guys next time. Thank you so much.